you can sell them anything. That's how real businesses are built. They're built via a brand that makes them feel seen, heard, and enough. But that's how real community, which is what a lot of people call brand, is built. And I think it's, one of the best gifts of all, one of the best skills of all is to learn that. Sometimes feels that marketing can be evil. Never sell somebody that you don't feel this will change their life in a very, very, very positive way. In order to build a business, it requires solving a problem by creating a new problem, by solving another problem, by creating another problem. And that's where you get.
Hello and welcome to Marketing Speak. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. It is my distinct pleasure to have James Guldan with us. James is the owner of Magic Agency, a full funnel growth agency that has generated over $1 billion in sales for clients like the Dalai Lama, Peter Diamandis, Frank Kern, and dozens of other industry giants in full marketing and physical product space. James, it's so great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
So I have to tell you that I loved our conversation that we had on my other show on Get Yourself Optimized, where you just bared your soul. You shared with so much vulnerability and authenticity the dark night, not even night, like year or two or whatever of your soul that you went through that would have just caused a lot of folks, if they went through the same thing, to check out, to just leave this physical world. And you persevered, and your story is so inspiring and beautiful. So first of all, I want to give a shout out to you and a huge appreciation for you being willing to share that story and to go to that kind of depth with me. And I just want to also inspire, I want to encourage and inspire our listener to go check out that episode on Get Yourself Optimized, which is episode 436. And it's incredible. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I mean, that was my favorite podcast of all time. I was talking before we did this of, one of my biggest KPIs for a podcast is when your mom calls you crying. What a gift to be able to get, the KPIs that I have for these. Well, I think everything's related, right? I think vulnerability is related to communication, which is related to marketing, which is related to everything.
So your mom called you crying from listening to that episode.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting that the questions that you asked got deeper than most of the things that you talk about with your family, right? Like communication is different for every person, and you get to eyeball how vulnerable you get with people. And the interesting side is, you're a very easy guy to be vulnerable with. There's my amazing compliment to you, is you're incredible at this. So it was a really cool conversation. I'm excited for this one as well.
Yeah. And the way that it unfolds is always a surprise and miraculous to me, because I just allow the words to come. I don't know what the conversation is going to lead to, how it's going to unfold. I just know and trust that the right words are going to be put in my mouth by the creator and by my unseen support team. And it's all going to unfold beautifully. Yeah. So something you said, you said it before we hit record here, and I just want to bring that to the forefront and start the interview that way. And it's marketing saved my life. You said that just a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Can you please elaborate on how marketing saved your life?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think it's a hyperbole. I think when I say that, people assume it is, but marketing is all about communication, making people feel seen, heard, and enough, right? And I think there's no more simplistic explanation of marketing or communication in general around making other people feel seen, heard, and enough. And I think from a healing perspective, what a gift you get to turn internally and use everything that you've learned in the marketplace to be able to do it to yourself. I think there's no deeper healing modality than how deep you can love yourself, how deep and vulnerable you can have conversations with yourself, how open you can be. And how changing nomenclature, language matters, how empathy is built in there. Like we talk about in our industry, doing empathy interviews and understanding the other person, but you could do that with yourself.
Yeah.
And, using all the tactics I learned to make a lot of money, I used to save my life, which is, oh man, the best gift of all. I think, the coolest thing is my journey, my health journey. And if you haven't listened to it, the nuts and bolts of it is that I was praying for death for 3 or 4 years and was severely disabled. So basically wasn't able to see, hear, walk, had a lot of disabilities. But the beauty of that is to be able to communicate yourself. Pain is a beautiful conversation to have, and suffering creates an amazing amount of joy in your life. And it is something that I think from a marketing standpoint, people don't really get to understand how valuable making your customers feel seen, heard, and enough actually is. A lot of people want to get into the tactics of how to market, but the reality is the fundamentals, the human beings just want to feel seen, heard, enough. And I think if you can make them do that, you can sell them anything.
Mhm.
And that's how real businesses are built. They're built via a brand that makes them feel seen, heard, and enough through the mission, through the values and beliefs, through indoctrinations, through a lot of different pieces. But that's how real community, which is what a lot of people call brand, is built. And I think it's, one of the best gifts of all, one of the best skills of all is to
Yeah.
learn that.
And on the flip side, if you were not to sell them, you would do them a great disservice, because that would then prevent them from taking the next leap forward, or going to the next chapter in their lives or their business. So you're doing a great service to humanity by actually selling them on what they need and want, as long as it's for their highest and best good.
Well, as long as you're not selling shame or fear, I think there's always an alignment of what they need, and getting into that. Like I understand the market sometimes feels that marketing can be evil, and it can definitely be manipulative in many different ways. When we talk about changing human psychology, mass control can be very easy to implement. The human brain is not as wise or as understanding as most people think it is. It is a very easy tool to manipulate. And when you do it for somebody's best interest, you are doing them an amazing service in selling them something that you have, right? And if you don't believe that that's true, don't be selling what you're selling. I really use that as a gut check of saying, like, if you don't believe that this is in their best interest, never sell somebody that you don't feel this will change their life in a very, very, very positive way.
Yeah. Yeah. So persuasion techniques, the kinds of stuff that you'd find in Robert Cialdini's book Influence, can be used for good. It can be used for bad. And by the way, Bob has been a guest on this podcast, episode 201, for our listener who is interested in learning about influence and persuasion techniques for good, of course. And if you address what's on, not just at the surface, but what's under the surface, what is really the unspoken problem for that consumer prospect, you're helping them to identify what's really troubling them. And also, you are building rapport and relatedness, and then you're helping them find the path to solution to a brighter future. And if you just keep it on the surface level, and I learned this from the book Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. There's the obvious spoken problem, what he calls the external problem, and then there's the internal problem, which I like to refer to as the unspoken problem, that one that's behind the mask, that's behind the scenes, that the consumer or the prospect won't discuss. But if you speak to that, wow, they feel heard, they feel understood, they feel gotten by you. And an example, I don't remember where I heard this from, but there's a certain, for a woman who's struggling with weight, there's a certain dress that she has to maintain in her wardrobe, even though she hates it. And she might refer to it as the fat dress. And it's the moo or whatever that will always fit when nothing else does. The jeans don't fit, whatever, then she can turn to the fat dress. And she hates having to have that fat dress. And yet, the weight loss regimens that she might try out may work for a time, but then she might get the weight back. And then there comes out the fat dress again. So the unspoken problem, the spoken problem, the obvious external problem is I need to lose the weight and I need to keep it off. That's where a lot of the marketing goes towards. What if instead you addressed the unspoken problem for that woman and spoke about the fat dress or whatever the equivalent terminology is for your market, right? Burn that fat dress and never have to worry about having one in your wardrobe ever again. It's like, wow, I feel gotten by whoever this is.
Well, you can go
Pretty
even deeper
powerful.
and make them feel enough, right? By giving
Yeah.
them going deeper than that. Because if you can tell somebody something they don't already know about themselves, you get instant trust and credibility. If they feel it versus them going, okay, everybody knows my problem. Like the weight loss industry is a very common one and
Yeah.
incredibly commodity based because there's just so many people in the market. So the messaging is all over the place. And I mean, the sad part is the weight loss industry is usually shame and fear versus love and kindness and getting people to love themselves and understand and transform their internal process to transform their external self. But it is a very powerful way to get trust and credibility. And once you have
Yeah.
trust and credibility, you gain a lot from them.
Yeah. I mean, so taking the before and after approach that most folks take in the weight loss industry may be effective, but it oftentimes is lacking the empathy, the loving kindness.
Yeah, it's
Might
shame
make you
based, right? They
feel
did it,
less
you
than
can't.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, you get the opportunity to answer two questions for somebody is, can it be done? Is the first question. And then can I do it? And if you can
Mm-hmm.
make them believe that it can be done, that this universe has solutions to their problem and that they can actually do it themselves, you have the principle of commitment. And when you get the principle of commitment, you can do a lot. And, it starts with that conversation. And I think a lot of marketing is, the top 1 to 3% of people are solutions oriented. They know what they want. They're going to look for it. And the top 10 to 15% are problem oriented, where they understand their problem, where you just have to empathize with their problem. And then, after about 30% of the total addressable market, they're, it's a lot less than that, but you're trying to figure out what the 4 or 5 problems are in that market and ideally handling them in a kind, positive way. Because when you do that, when you handle it with shame and fear, you're getting a short-term person who hates themselves, and that will transform into something different. And they will not be a great representative of you if you can't transform them internally, only externally. They're going to be a very short-term client, and you're not going to be able to build a business out of it. You build a product, because in order to
Yeah.
build a business, it requires solving a problem by creating a new problem, by solving another problem, by creating another problem. And that's where my real expertise is in customer journey. And that's kind of where I love the beauty of not selling somebody a thing, but selling them a lifestyle change and selling them a mission and selling them something much more than what they're buying. And you sell
Yeah.
them what they want and give them what they need. And I think it's, the most beautiful aspect of growing a real business. The scale aspect, from 3 to 50 million requires not a product, but a business and an ecosystem and a community and a lot of other things that are brand oriented.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Can
think
can
you have a
you
lot of
elaborate?
opportunities to
Give
do
us
that.
maybe an example
An example of what part?
of that customer journey, the lifestyle change, maybe for a client of yours that you've instituted a system and a whole ethos.
Yeah. So one customer journey we're coming up with right now is figuring out so let's talk about the mental health market. It's one you and I both love a ton.
Yeah.
And the mental health market is most people are not very solutions oriented. There's a stigma around mental health, especially over a certain age demographic and psychodemographic. So in order to understand the initial problem that somebody has, it's usually going to be something like a very common one with entrepreneurship is time, right? People have this viewpoint that there isn't an abundance of time. They think it's very scarce. So, and it's scarce because they have a lot of underlying mental conversations that they don't see this world as abundant. They see it as scarce, but you can't address that, right? You got to address their concern, which is I need more time, which you can then address it as here are some tactics to be able to optimize it. But the reality is you're helping them create a little bit more time in order to transform their mental health. And that's where you get into the deeper conversations of how do you love yourself? What are the things that make you tick? How do you control your subconscious versus your conscious mind? Your subconscious controls 97% of your decisions, and 3% of it is your cognition of like what you actually think. So if you can prime and change your subconscious, which is a long-term solution to it, how do you do that? So you're selling them originally, how do they get more time? Then you're selling them, how do they love themselves more? Then how do you love your significant other? So you take their problem set and you break it up into a bunch of different problems where you could have that customer forever, right? I mean, there's an infinite amount of problems related to time, especially in the mental health capacity. Then it's how do you have conversations with your children? How do you create an identity around this? How do you change your identity? How do you map these things out? But that way you're not selling a one-off problem, because what happens is the cost to acquire a customer, especially on cold traffic, you're on the organic side, which the cost of entry is time, attention, and long-term investment, but it is capped, right? On your end. Where cold traffic, it becomes a lot more difficult because they're not finding you, you're finding them. And so you have to have a much deeper customer journey because the acquisition model is much more expensive on cold traffic. And especially as you scale, because you're finding different problems, you're finding more awareness, you're finding a lot of different things in order to scale. And if somebody can sell more things to that customer, their lifetime value is going to be much higher than yours is. So they're going to crush you, right? That's why the big players typically win. You don't want to mess with them right away. You want a total addressable market of 11 million to start. Anything bigger than that, and you're swimming in deep waters with people who are going to kill you with acquisition, because they can have attribution metrics that they can acquire a customer for more expensive than what they're going to get out of them for at least 90 days. And that competitor is going to crush you. So you want to stay under the 11 million, but you want to make sure you have a lifetime value that at some point you could compete with the big boys. And at that stage, you can go to a bigger total addressable market.
So what would be an example of an offer that you have helped a client craft and maybe set up a whole set of upsells and downsells and cross sells and so forth to really optimize and maximize the opportunity?
Yeah. So I think that the first 90 days is the most important, because that's like the real stick rate. And it's hard to kind of have KPIs or anything else after 90 days. So really what we do as a company is we focus on the first 90 days, because that's really, once you get the first 90 days, the rest of it becomes pretty easy because they're aligned with value, belief, indoctrination. So let's go with the mental health side of it, of time, right? So time in the beginning is you sell them a time product where it is a book in the beginning of how to optimize your time. Then it goes to a checklist of like things that you can optimize. So it kind of like summarizes the book. It makes it easier. There's an Audible version that's an upsell. Then it goes to a 7-day workshop series of how to get more out of your day with accountability, worksheets before and after. The reality is you're just really trying to have them understand their why. Why do they want more time? Why do they want to do this? So that's what the workshop's about. And then once the workshop's there, you get their why. And that's where the onboarding starts, where they can join the community of coaches to optimize their time and figure out figure out a plan for them to understand where they're at and how to get them through that. So a lot of that's about onboarding. And in this particular case, especially with mental health, but most products, if you have a long lifetime, like life cycle of customer journey, you want to do onboarding. And that's where you tell them who it isn't for and get really clear on who it isn't for, like the next step of, okay, you have to have these things in order to be successful moving forward. But the reality is you want to understand their story, right? People love to tell their story and they love to tell their why. And if you can understand their why, you get to use their nomenclature, their understanding. You don't want to be the hero to anybody. You just want to be the guide. So you don't want to tell them what to buy. You want them to tell you what they want to buy. And that's like the secret sauce, is the onboarding step of letting them tell you what they want, and then you give it to them. And
Mm-hmm.
from those steps, you can understand their why. And also it helps for conversations if somebody gets overwhelmed, because if you're dealing with stuff like mental health, you're dealing with a lot of trauma, you're dealing with a lot of resistance. So it's helpful to, if they're having issues, to be able to anchor back in, is this still your why? Is this still what you're trying to solve? And if it is, okay, it's going to be tough to go through this. And I know you're going to want to quit, and I know you're going to want to do these things. But the reality is, if this why is really important to you, which people really only have 3 things they care about in their life. I think people overcomplicate it. But if you're not on the 3 most important things that a customer cares about, there's not going to be an easy buy, and you're definitely not going to scale. So you definitely want to be their top 3 problems in their life and understand that psychodemographic very well.
Gotcha.
But you really want to anchor in and figure out where they're at, and then continue them down their journey and walk them through it. And there's, when you understand their why, you can custom tailor a path for them that will be successful. And because you're going to get an amazing lifetime value, where if you have a monthly recurring revenue product or an annual recurring revenue product, it's all about aligning incentives of how long they can stay. And I believe that's the most beautiful business model to have, is recurring revenue, because it aligns incentives on both sides. The company has to provide enough value for somebody to stay, and the customer has to believe in it enough to stay, and a long enough commitment for them to get real transformation.
Yeah. Now, the who this is not for, for some, probably it sounds like the takeaway or reverse psychology. In other words, manipulation. But
Yep.
that's not what you're describing here. You're talking about helping them to
No, that's so what you're talking about is negging, right? And that's different of
nagging, right?
saying like,
Right.
yeah,
From
yeah, and
our
it's
pickup
using the
world.
pickup artistry community
Yeah.
of there's an energetic community to a relationship with somebody. You can either bring somebody up to your level, or make you feel better by bringing them down, right? And you don't want to make them feel better by bringing it, but you do want to understand who it isn't for, right? And I think a lot of people have a really tough problem with going, who is my product not for, and who will not be successful in it, and who are the clients that are not going to get the same alignment or the goals. And I think really making sure you're clear on who it's not for is really good for the audience, because it gives them a hug. Like, oh, that's not me. The biggest psychology tool you can use is in-group and out-group. And what that is basically, you want to go, oh, that's not me. That person's crazy, right? And the political system does it perfectly. I see it as a net negative way, but you can do it in a net positive way, where you want to create a group of people who are, no, this is me. It makes it better for referrals too, of like this in group and out group of, oh, that out group is crazy, or they don't know what we know. And if you can have that type of group mentality and indoctrinate that in the beginning steps, it creates a long-term trust metric. And also there's a metric called R naught, and that's how viral and how good the referral system is for a program, because cold traffic and organic traffic is only as good as you can scale it. But referral traffic, that becomes insanely powerful. Warm traffic becomes insanely powerful at scale. So if you can get those metrics, CrossFit has done such a good job. If you ever talk about somebody who's done CrossFit or 75 hard, right? They've done
Mm-hmm.
such a good job of like, oh, you can't do it. Pfft, yeah, those are the weak people, but the strong people are the 75 hard. And when you have that type of in-group, out-group mentality, along with and they use a challenge in it, which I love the challenge format of overcoming a difficult task, trauma bonding can be insanely beautiful for indoctrination and moving people forward in a very positive, net positive direction, where there's a barrier to entry to get into your product. And so I love what they've done with 75 Hard, because they took one of the most difficult commodity-based spaces in the world and they crushed it. And I love those businesses that have a pattern interrupt product where they're like, oh, P90X, that was way too easy. Yeah, that's for your grandma. This is for, men or women who just are like really looking to crush life. And it attracts a lot of people in that regard who don't want to be seen as weak, and they want to internally feel themselves as insanely strong and hard. And they've just done a really good job with in-group, out-group, which is why they don't have to do the marketing that most others do because they have such a polarizing message in an in-group, out-group that you're going to hear about it, right? If you don't have any friends that are in 75 hard, that's all they talk about for at least 75 days. And, they
Yeah.
post it online and they post it everywhere of like they went through it, or, oh man, I didn't make it. I get the opportunity to reset. But they've done a beautiful job marketing that.
Yep. Well, it's got legs if there's a subreddit dedicated to the program.
Yeah, that's your KPI for success. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, it's a lot more than just a subreddit, right? I mean, there's underground, overground communities for it. There's a lot of community aspect to it, and in real brand building, when you can align value and belief systems, it is an insane in-group, out-group metric, and it's very, very, very difficult to beat that. I mean, especially in that space, because weight loss and muscle gaining can be such a commodity based space where people try a bunch of different things. But if you're doing 75 hard, you're only doing 75 hard. You're not doing that and yoga and other things, right? You're dealing with that thing, that one massive challenge right now.
Yeah. Have you done it?
I don't need to, right? I don't see myself like I'm not that target demographic, right? I internally feel strong. I internally feel love and connection. Like my way to lose weight and not lose weight, but just like have a good body image of myself is just, I have a good body image of myself. So you tend to eat the right things when you've aligned, like you can control your identity of how you see yourself. And there's this great book called The Status Game where you can control your status of what you think. My status is a great husband and a great dad. And most people, we were talking about this earlier, most people have a status of work, right? Their identity is all around their work. And that creates a very limiting perspective on how they see and can change the world, where you get to choose what you want your identity to be. I don't think a lot of people know that personality test. There's a great book called Personality is, or something like that. Personality Isn't Permanent by Dr. Ben Hardy.
Yeah, personality isn't permanent.
Yeah, and it gives you the opportunity to change, right? I think a lot of people map them when they've been labeled by others. And you can use this in the marketing aspect of really figuring out, like most people who've labeled you didn't have your best interests in mind, right? Your parents, your teachers, like they had their best interests in mind, not yours. And you get to change that label of what you want to do in this world. And when you do that, you get to align your values and beliefs with what you're going to do. It's pretty unstoppable to stop somebody who's changed their status and their identity to something that they want. You don't need a challenge for that, right? Like it just happens and you go through it and your total identity changes.
So do you have a book in you that you're going to put out? Like Andy Frisella has the 75 hard book. Do you have something that is cooking?
Well, I love it. Yeah. Well, if somebody hasn't listened to my personal story of my health journey, it was amazing. It was beautiful and incredible. And I tie in the business aspect with that, right? So the book I'm writing is in the mental health world. And it is specifically around how to love yourself in a very powerful way. I don't know what the title is going to be yet, but we're mapping it out. I have a very specific methodology that I'm optimizing for how to get there. And I feel very called to tying everything in, right? I felt like at one point in my life, my identity was around, I'm a really good marketer. And that was great. That was awesome to do it. But my identity now is much different than it once was. And I think a lot of people get the opportunity to change that. And I'd love to see more kindness, love, and acceptance in this world. And it starts internally. And that's kind of what the premise, the mission of the book will be.
Yeah, amazing. I'm looking forward to it. When do you think it's going to come out?
I probably got a year left. I mean, you've written books, so it's like the first one is shit. You go, you know what, this is trash. I don't think I know what I'm talking about. Then you slowly get through the revisions of continuity and understanding like how to make it happen. But that first revision is pretty unforgiving. So it does take a bit of time. And right now, I probably work about 3 to 4 hours a week. So that's my total work time. And just because a lot of my time and attention is spent elsewhere. And I'm doing things with Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi right now, and like some stuff one-on-one. But the reality is I put a CEO in charge of the business and a CMO in charge of the results engineering. And it has been one of the best things I have ever done. And I just get to coach them, right? And they get to coach me on how to be the best investor in my business I possibly can.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. Because as Dan Sullivan says, the entrepreneur who's too tightly scheduled cannot transform. So you're at the opposite end of that spectrum.
Well, I think it's so easy to get stuck in. I mean, and part of the mental health side of it is that I think it's easier to feel really distracted and not to have. I think most people are not their own best friend, right? And they have like most people have the only time they really get with themselves is in the shower, which is why they call them shower thoughts. Which is interesting to me is like, they get 7 minutes in the shower by themselves, but the reality is like, man, you're such an amazing thing that you get to converse with, and you get this amazing opportunity to get to know yourself and like really get to love yourself in a very powerful way. And I don't think a lot of people do that. They use work as a tool to distract and to see themselves through a status and identity that a KPI is really easy to measure. How much money do you make? But I think capitalism is great in many, many ways, but it does not help our education system and our healthcare system. And I think it also doesn't help mental health, right? A really good employee is one with terrible mental health. Somebody that is really bad with boundaries, somebody that does not respect their time very well. Like we see that as a really good employee now. And I would love for that to change.
Yeah, me too. Speaking of shower thoughts, the name that popped in my mind when you said that was Nick Offerman. Have you seen his funny
There's a lot of people that have
videos?
made famous, like the Chive and other things. They have like a bunch of shower thoughts and like the interesting tidbits of transformation. It's like, one sentence things, but it's amazing that when you give yourself time to think and give yourself space to think, you can become such an amazing, better person by doing that. And a lot of people don't love to be uncomfortable, right? And uncomfortability is the pain has to outweigh the problem. Suffering is an amazing catalyst for change. Uncomfortability is beautiful. And, I like to see, I was obviously blessed with a lot of suffering through my health component, but I see it as a cold tub of life, right? Like it gives you the transformation. It gives you the opportunity to overcome really difficult things, and you gain an insight into yourself. And that way you get indoctrinations, belief systems, like all the things I'm talking about from a marketing standpoint, you get to do internally as the CEO of your own body. You get to manage and change and transform a lot.
Yeah. By the way, do you do cold tubs, ice baths?
Yeah, a couple times a day.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, I mean that yeah, I mean, again, it's everybody's journey to do it, but it's one of the most fun because I do about 3 hours of meditation a day. I do quite a bit of cold tub. I love the sauna for transformation, workout. Like I do an hour workout. It's amazing what you fill your time with when it isn't busy work. Like I think a lot of people think they're really busy, but the reality is like Gary Keller has this great book called The One Thing.
Yeah, great book.
Do one thing a day. You will be amazed at how much that will transform your life of just doing one thing a day and being like, I crushed that one thing. If you can't think of only one thing to do in a day, you're overwhelmed with a checklist. You love the dopamine of just checking things off. And if you really focus on what's only one thing I can do in a day to move it forward, one, you're going to see a lot less overwhelm, a lot less anxiety, a lot less depression, and a lot more results. I think, if you have a problem in your life, break it down into, one thing a day and you do that and you crush it. But when you do have space, it's amazing what you fill it with. I do a lot of meditations with my younger self, and a lot of it is finding joy in what you want to do and what brings you joy and what did I do as a kid, or what did I wish I did more as a kid, and I do it now. And I have the opportunity to have a 2-year-old son. So him and I build forts together, watch video games, go on adventures. Like we get to do all this amazing stuff every day. I like to spend 6 or 7 hours a day with him versus work. And there's an incredible stat of by age 12, you've spent 65% of the amount of time with your son or daughter that is available to them. By 18, it is 95% of the available time you will spend with them is by age 18. And that's just an amazing stat. And I think it encompasses where I put my time and attention, because right now the coolest thing is to reparent yourself through your children and let them teach you all about the world and how amazingly curious kids are and how much energy they have versus how much energy we have now and how to get that back. I mean, they unlock a lot of secrets by just hanging out with them and listening to them.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if we spoke about this on the previous interview we did on Get Yourself Optimized, but when you were talking about meditating, connecting with your younger self, it reminded me of my interview with Ray Brem. And Ray had this incredible experience where he was attending a Hoffman process event, and the instructor and he told the group to imagine like your 8-year-old self and going through a particularly hard time that you might have gone through at that point in your life, in your childhood, and to then send love to that version of you and say these words: everything's going to be okay. I love you. I'm you in the future. And he did that. But what was really interesting is this flash, like flood of memories came back to him from his childhood where he actually remembered doing that with himself, receiving that message. And he was very distraught at that time. He was contemplating suicide or running away or something drastic. And then he heard that in his inner hearing. And it really calmed him and helped him. And then he forgot all about it until his adulthood, and there he was at the Hoffman process creating that experience for his 8-year-old self. How cool is that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have a personal belief that that's real, right? And one of
Me
the
too.
moments that I had when I was really sick, right? Um, I was peeing blood. I had yellow eyes. My hearing had gone out. I wasn't really able to walk. I remember sitting in my sauna, like just like really contemplating the beauty of death and just like how kind it would be to kill myself and how amazingly awesome that gift would be. And I'd heard my future self talk to me about it and just go, you know what? Don't worry about it. You're having a tough time. You're going to get through it. I'm you, 5 years from now. And dude, you have a whole different version of this. It's really tough right now, but you got this. Don't worry.
Mm.
And I just remember crying, for hours in that state and just being like, okay, that's all I needed to hear. Right. I think it's so easy to give up when you don't have a good vision of recovery. You don't have a good vision of anything ever getting better. Like it's, especially tough when you keep losing things, right? Like you're getting more and more disabled. I think that becomes very easy to have a conversation with yourself of like the kindest thing I can do to myself is end this version of me right now. And so totally believe in that. But also from like to tie it back into the marketing side of how marketing saved my life is this is very beautiful to do with your customers too. Is like, what does their 8-year-old self want? Right. And bigger, what does their 80-year-old self want? What is the wise version of themselves? Like I also do a meditation where I talk to my 80-year-old self. And that dude is smart and wise and kind and understanding. And being able to talk to that person gives you your ideals, right? Like if you take your values and beliefs right now and you extend them over the next however long it takes you to get 80, what does that ideal person look like? And how do you bridge the gap between them and you? And that's what I view as like one of my most powerful meditations is doing that. But also from the marketing standpoint, what are the values and beliefs that your customers have and where do they see themselves 80, 40 years from now? Because if you can tell them, you become the best mental health gift they will ever have is confirming that they are their best selves and they are enough. And if they continue down the path that they're on right now, that they become the hero, that they're in their hero's journey. And most people, I have this great quote, if you approach everybody as if they're going through the hardest time in their life, you're going to be right 90% of the time. Right. So it's amazing the amount of empathy and understanding from a marketing standpoint you can give people by just telling them. There was a great, the guy from Blue's Clues came back on and he's just like, I'm so proud of you. Everybody who made it through to this, who watched me as a kid, I'm just so proud of you. And it's amazing when you tell people that, what they internalize and how they view and can forgive themselves in a very powerful way. And when you can market in that way, you get transformation that you've never seen before, especially in the transformation markets, right? Because most of what we do is in information products. Like, we are one of the best in the world at information product selling. And it's because of that, right? You're looking, the core insight of that is people are looking for transformation to become somebody different. And when you give them permission to do that, and you give them a hero's journey of telling them that they're enough and telling them that they are the hero of their own journey and they're making their way through. One, it helps them through tough times because they're usually in a really tough time right now. Hence, they're looking for solutions, or at least they're identifying with a problem. And two is that it gives them permission to transform. It gives, like, people sometimes need permission to go, things can change. And when you can give that to them by identifying with their 80-year-old self, or even with their 8-year-old self, like, what would the kid version of you do? The kid version of you would probably be a lot more forgiving to yourself than you are right now. They'd probably be a lot more curious. They'd probably have a lot more play. There's a great statistic on play of the happiness level of people who have an identity around playing and the happiness level of people who see play as negative. And it is astronomical to see how happy people are who can play. And when you can give them permission to do that, it just becomes a lot more powerful.
Amazing. I'm going to have my team dig up that statistic about play and happiness and include it in the show notes. And also that Blues Clues,
Yeah.
like 25-year anniversary video.
Do you know what I'm talking about, though? When
Yeah.
he had done such an amazing job of just like, hey, here's where I'm at now, and I know where you're at. I know I'm proud of you. You should be so proud of yourself. Like, that, what a great gift to give people is permission to be proud of themselves.
Yeah, for sure. Amazing. So, of course, the converse of this, of really going in internally and meditating, asking these tough questions, and being open to the answers, whether they're from your younger self, your older self, your higher self, God directly. The opposite of that is being afraid to be alone with your thoughts, always playing music in the car or podcasts or in the house or the wherever you're at, playing the TV in the background, or some sort of chatter to keep you from your loneliness. And that's a real problem, because then you don't have any time to connect. You're just filling that void with constant noise.
Well, and especially in the capitalistic culture that we have, that's how consumerism is created, right? Is you're filling that void with buying an identity and buying something that you hope will give you enough dopamine to make you feel okay. And that's why we have such an amazing issue of indentured servitude in America right now, right? It's, people are buying things with things that they can't afford to solve a problem that won't solve. And that's where I think marketing can be evil. That's where I view marketing as something that, when you're selling something, is like, don't worry, this will make you happy. And it isn't a transformation internally, or you're not making them the hero, you're the hero. That internally is idolization. And I think that in itself can be very, very detrimental to somebody. I think Louis Vuitton has made this big, of just like, don't worry, buy a $3,000 purse and this will make you validated. This will make you feel enough. This will make you feel in there. And buying a luxury, anything, will not do that, right? Only you can give yourself permission to feel enough. But it doesn't make that conversation happen, right? I would say Louis Vuitton is probably one of the best luxury good. That the whole piece there is that whole conglomerate does an amazing job of in-group, out-group, making you not feel enough, making you feel shame. They've done an incredible job marketing on a negative angle. That's something that, as I gain more insight of expertise in the marketing side, is something that I really want to address and change and stop. Hence, I only think that happens through mental health. I really think that becomes when you are comfortable talking to yourself, when you are comfortable seeing yourself as the amazing person that you are, you have way less consumerism. You buy needs versus wants. And most of us have wants and not needs, and they see them as needs. America is probably one of the toughest consumerism countries in the world. And it's due to marketing, right? We are allowed to market to children. Holy shit, should that be illegal? Marketing, there's 3 protected classes in the world, right? The young, the elderly, and the mentally handicapped, and the disabled, right? The mentally disabled is what I meant. But I think if you can market to those people, that should be illegaler than shit. Like if we are putting something together, like that's something I would really, really, really love to stop, is being able to market to those demographics.
Yeah.
And because they're too easy to manipulate in a negative sense, right? And I think there's just, you can do too many. Marketing can be very, very life changing in a negative way when you market to children. Like they see what you say as fact, and there's a lot of negative detrimental items you can do to them. But again, you can do very positive things if they have consent, if they have a brain that's willing to go, is this actually in my best interest, right? And that's where I hope marketing goes in a much different direction. I love what's been happening with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has been stopping a lot of overpromising and underdelivering. And like a lot of marketers see it as like, oh shit. I'm like, bring it on. I love when they can stop certain things like that. Like I think when there was a process in California, everybody was frustrated that they stopped subscription laws. So that had to be as easy to cancel as it was to start up. And I don't know if you ever remember Extends, but they had this policy where I think at one point you had to get a doctor's note that your penis didn't get bigger. So you were using like shame in order to cancel a subscription. And of course they grew a conglomerate on it, but that type of stuff should be very, 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 very illegal. And it's trending in the right direction, but the mental health side of marketing, I think, can be so powerful if you use it to build people up rather than tear them down.
Yeah. I remember hearing a statistic. I'll have to source it somehow or get my team to. It's about the customer base of Louis Vuitton and the average.
It's under like 65K a year.
Yeah.
Like yeah. It's so people want it to signal wealth, right? It's a great signaling, virtue signaling tool. Well, not virtue, just signaling tool. And yeah, the primary buyer of luxury goods is poverty, right? And it's like, that's really not good, because they want this identity of feeling wealthy without internally feeling that way. They want to use signals to make people think that, and that is powerfully negative in a lot of different ways. And I think capitalism has a lot to do with that. I don't want to knock on capitalism too much, but it's also like it creates this identity crisis where if your KPI for your worth as a human is money, I think that's messed up. I don't know if we're allowed to swear on here, but I definitely think it is.
Too late. You already done twice.
Yeah. It is one of those things where I think capitalism has destroyed the mental health of people because not everybody's built to make money.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a very valuable KPI for how valuable a human can be. And Louis Vuitton and other places like that are using negative marketing and shame in order to get people to do that. And I think that's just a really tough position from a marketing standpoint. I hope that changes. I really do.
Yeah. So you used the word idolization a little bit ago, and I want to circle back to that. That got me thinking about the whole idea of false idols, idol worship, idolatry, and how when we put our faith and trust in whether it's a brand or an object or a guru or a tool or resource as an intermediary instead of going direct to the creator, we've really fallen off the path. And
you're delegating your decision making and your values and beliefs to another person.
Yeah.
Where I have a very polarizing belief that I don't think heroes should exist, right? And I hate using the word should, but I think the only hero you could have is either the universe itself or your version of yourself at a later stage, because they have different problems, values, and beliefs. Like there's a lot of different things people have where you're never going to match up with every decision that they make. And I hate the oversimplification of polarization. It's like, it's either this or this, right? There's a lot of complications to people. There's a lot of things that are amazing that you agree with. There's a cool, Joe Polish does this at the events, but he goes, name the 3 people you admire the most and then what their qualities are, and name the 3 qualities. And the qualities that they have, those are the things that you care about, right? Those are the values and beliefs that you really care about, are those things, not the person, because that person is flawed. Every human being is insanely flawed in a lot of different ways, in beautiful, beautiful ways. But looking up to somebody, like that's the I Am Not Your Guru. They did a great documentary on that. And then but really giving up your decision making to somebody else who you feel has your best interest in mind. Nobody has your best interest in mind, right? I want to be so clear on that. Only you have your best interest in mind. They have an idea of what your best interest could be, but it's not you. And so when you gain the ability to be your own best friend and love yourself in a very powerful way, you get the opportunity to consult yourself, right? And really dig deep and go, okay, is what they're saying, does that align with my view? And if it does, let's do it. If it doesn't, let's not do it. And I think it can just be so dangerous to, not even just from like a biblical standpoint, but just from a practical standpoint, to delegate I saw it in the healthcare market, right? Like if you were to delegate your health to the healthcare market, you are in for a really tough ride. If you think those doctors care as much about your health as you do, you are in for a really tough journey. If you get really sick, the first thing you do is you learn more about that illness than any doctor ever could. And when you can do that, you use them as consultants versus somebody who's there to save your life, right? Because they have a million other things to do. You may be a priority, but one of the many priorities that they have.
A priority for the 10 minutes that they're assigned to you, and then they have to move on to the next patient.
Yeah. And humans are fallible, right? In such a powerful way. And I think it's just one of these things where somebody has this belief system that somebody else knows better than they do. I think can be very dangerous. I think it can be insanely dangerous to do those pieces. Yeah.
Yeah. Which gets me thinking about how, again, Donald Miller has this framework, the story brand framework in that book, Building a Story Brand. And he talks about there isn't just the internal problem, or what I referred to earlier as the unspoken problem. There's also the philosophical problem. And if you can get down to that level of understanding with your prospect, you're.
But that's the mission, right?
Yeah.
You gain a mission of why things should change. And that's the most powerful aspect of any business, of building any brand. I think most people really want to overcomplicate brands by being like, I want a logo and some font types. But the reality of what a brand is it's your mission, right? It's what do you stand for? What are your values and beliefs? How can you align those values and beliefs with your customers in order to build trust and credibility to be their best bet, right? There's this amazing brand. It's called, it's like Thrive Market, somewhere where they curate a bunch of good products, where they're like healthy products. And my wife only buys things from them, right? Like if they put on anything, we'll buy anything they have because we know they've been vetted through this health place. And it's like, if you can build that in there where you have enough trust and credibility, where they've done their due diligence and you're delegating certain pieces of it, that's a brand.
Yeah.
And that can be such an amazing brand of the mission of, hey, most of these companies like Pepsi, and I can say this publicly, Pepsi and Coke do not have your best interest in mind. I promise you, they're not thinking about your health, right? Like those sugar poison waters do not have your best interest in mind. And if you care about your health, you wouldn't drink that, right? But a lot of people, you get to figure out what your values and beliefs are and then align them with the companies that you want to associate with. And brand building can be beautiful for that.
I read something recently where I forget which executives, whether it was Coke or Pepsi or one of the two, someone went through the trash of what they were drinking at their meetings, and almost everyone was drinking like the Dasani water or whatever, and not Coke or whatever, sugar drinks, because they knew better. So they weren't even consuming the biggest money makers for their company. They wouldn't touch that stuff with a 10-foot pole.
Well, and that's another thing is like, I think, not to get conspiracy theory, but I think delegating to the government or delegating to any entity that isn't yourself of what you believe or what's healthy. Like the FDA does the best they can, and they're doing their best. They have an insane job, but I would not trust them to have my health interests in mind, right? I think they're doing a massive sweep to make sure there aren't charlatans in the healthcare market. But the reality is, if you're not looking into the things that you care about, I think you're in for a tough time, right? And I've been a massive use case for that, and figuring those pieces out.
Yeah. Well, when you find out the name of that brand, that's the marketplace.
Yeah, my wife does most of the shopping, so I don't like. She talks about it a lot. I just kind of tune it out and be
Okay,
like,
well, you'll
that's my
find
wife's
it,
brand.
or you'll get
Yeah.
it from her,
I'll put it up here.
and
Yeah,
then I'll
yeah,
add it to the show notes, or I'll the royal my team will take care of that. So you'd mentioned also polarization, and that reminded me of this concept of the duality being an illusion, which I believe to be true, that ultimately it's all miracles, everything, and it's designed with divine orchestration and not randomness. So if you buy into the polarity and the duality, then you're buying into the lie, the fallacy, the matrix illusion, and you then get the bad along with the good. You get the dark along with the light. So if you want to rise above that, connect to the tree of life and all the miracles, and that might be um, uh, pretty woo-woo for our listener to hear. Probably not, though, because if they're still listening to this show, I tend to drop
yeah.
these
This
sorts of
got pretty
things into
esoteric
the
pretty quick.
episode.
Yeah.
They've moved on by
Yeah.
now if they don't like that stuff. So
Well, and what I meant was more polarization in the communication you have for a
okay.
pattern interrupt on the front end of making sure when you're polarizing, you're using belief systems and mission of something that's it's really getting clear on who it isn't for, because you want to say something that when who it isn't for, it makes them very frustrated that you say that, right? But the people that are in alignment with your mission are like, oh hell yeah, I love that. And say what you want about Donald Trump, but I think he is one of the best marketers of all time when it comes to polarization, because he is making very sweeping statements that make people feel that he has their best interests in mind. And he is incredible at the polarization statements. Like, I mean, he owned Twitter for a very long period of time.
Yeah.
He won a presidential election based off of it. Like, that was insane. Now, granted, use it as a principle, not exactly what, I think most presidents are. There's a great book called The Psychopath Test, and the people who want power are usually people who shouldn't have it, because it comes with a lot of downside. And the people who are willing to overcome the downside of being president of the United States are, have some level of psychopathy to them. So don't use it in like its entirety, but I do think that Donald Trump specifically did a really good job of polarization.
Yeah, he did. He did. So let's circle this back to, or tie this all back into marketing and direct response, which you're an expert in. So, what sort of lessons would you want our listener to be walking away from a direct response standpoint? Like, how do they get better at direct response from the conversation that we have had today?
Yeah, well, I think it's like learn less about tactics, because I don't think that's fully sustainable, right? I think learn more about the fundamentals. Like, if you're going to do one thing for your business about direct response, learn more about your customer, talk to them, right? Like, figure out where they are. Like, the psychodemographic of a human being can be beautiful to know and understand. And it also, like, if you want to talk about what the biggest arbitrage opportunity in the world is on cold traffic, it's finding more about your market than the Meta or Google AI knows, right? Because most people want to run the pixels, but that's where all the expensive people are, right? If you can go, this person has, I know that people who have doulas care about their mental health, right? Or care about these things. So now you're just doing, just tracking doulas, and you can do a lot more stuff in that. But I think it's just really learning about the psychodemographic, like really learning about your customer, and knowing where what their heaven is, what their hell is, I mean, there's a lot of tactics for learning about it, but like just learning their dreams, their why, their nomenclature, how they talk about it. What do they call a success? What do they call a loss? What do they call, how do they talk to themselves? How do they talk to others? If you can learn all these pieces, that's the best direct response tool. A lot of people go, let's test price point, let's test headlines, let's test, like those are great, but those are going to give you incremental outcomes, where the exponential comes from really understanding and knowing your customer better than the competition.
Yeah.
And I just think a lot of people think they know their customers really well. And you do, as you scale like from 0 to 250 to 500K, you know your customers pretty well because you're pretty much talking to all of them. But the second you go from 500K to 1 million, you're getting cold traffic involved. So it becomes a little bit less. And then 1 to 3, you're more disassociating one. Then 3 to 10 is even more disassociated, because at that point you're using unit economics instead of emotional feelings to dictate the company. And at that stage, doing empathy interviews can be so powerful, of just understanding the people who've stayed the longest. So typically you find who are your best customers and then talk to them. And everybody wants to tell their story. And I just think a lot of people negate, like, our secret sauce in our business is empathy interviews. We'll literally call your customers and go, tell me about you, right? Who are you? What do you care about? Like, who did you vote for? Why did you vote for them? Who did you like? Talk to me about, like, what's a life lesson you learned recently? That's a beautiful one for getting their nomenclature and understanding of how they did that. What is something that, like, where do you hang out? Just talk to me about kind of like what you do. Why does this product matter to you? And then you get their explanation, and also getting better at your customers selling your product versus you selling your product is very powerful. If you can get customer testimonials from your best customers, just going, what's your name? Why did you buy? Like, what was your purpose for buying? Because people will have empathy with, like, oh, I have that problem too. Oh, I wish I could have said it that way. And it's not the owner saying it, it's a customer saying it. And then what was your transformation, right? What did you change into? And that gives them a heaven and hell. And it gives them the opportunity to go, will this work? Yes. Will it work for me? I'm like that person, right? And if you do good enough with your marketing, you can basically, the principle of likability can be very powerful. It can be skin, age, belief structure, value system. Like, how somebody sees like-minded people will change throughout the industry. But you want to attach people who they go, that's their person's like me, and they solve that problem. That's the best direct response you can ever have. Is if you want to say how directly you can change somebody's mind and transform, it would be through somebody else, not you, saying how great your product was with the exact problem they have and what their outcome was and the timeline was for that. Like, that's instant trust and credibility.
Yeah. Wow. Empathy interviews, that comes from design thinking, right?
I don't know where we got it. I'm sure it came from somewhere. Our CMO uses that word, so that's what I use.
Yeah, it's great.
You just get somebody with a therapy skill set to just talk to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's a whole set of processes around it. I'll include a link to more detail about empathy interviews in the show notes. Like, you avoid binary questions or closed questions. You encourage
you don't want to lead them on.
Pursue tangents, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of, like, most things when you're trying to sell something to somebody. Just be open to where the conversation goes, because where you learn the most is in the weirdest stuff, right? When somebody goes off on a weird tangent about their grandma being in a bowling league, and you go, really? That's incredible. What about that? Like, oh man, and I go and we drink beer, and it's like, cool, awesome. Like, walk me through that. Like, what is that like for you? And now you get these insane stories that the competition will never have, because they'll never dig that deep.
Yeah.
And you get an amazing direct response, because it's like, does your grandma bowl at this bowling league? And you have you wouldn't be that direct, but you could subcontext a lot of that in there and go, like, oh shit. Yeah. That's like one of my favorite memories I have. And so yeah, it's the most amazing stuff is in the details.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. So how does our listener work with your agency and learn from you more and transform their business through your wisdom?
Yeah. So if you go to magic.agency, and then we have fill out a form, basically you have to qualify, and then you get on a call with the salesperson that'll see if we can help. And the biggest thing that differentiates us, I think, is that one of our major core values are love, kindness, and acceptance, and that's how we market. So if you're looking for tactics or kind of like a negative sales item of getting people to feel shame and fear, that is not how we do it. There's a lot of places that will take you on, but that isn't how we market. So I think it's aligning belief systems of trying to change the world in a better way.
Awesome. And do you actually have your core values of love, kindness, and acceptance listed on your magic.agency website?
I'm not sure. Like, I don't run the business anymore, so I don't actually know. But there
Well, that's a
are
good question to
internal core
ask.
values. Yeah. No. Great. Yeah. Great questions. Yeah. Yeah.
Because you want to make sure, because you're the visionary, even though you're not running the company, you want to make sure that that vision gets, uh, you know, put in place on your site and in your brand ethos and everything that you guys do.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about it earlier. Is like the admonishing admission that I have is that um, if we were to like do an audit, a marketing audit of our site, I don't think it would do so well. Like the amazing aspect of the gardener who doesn't tend to his own stuff. I guess we've never really had to, right? We've always had an abundance of clients, and our results speak more than, which I love that, right? I do think it's a story of like why I haven't optimized it, but I do think
It's a
that
great
our clients
story.
always speak very kindly of us. Yeah. Well, everything's a story, right? But my story, at least, is that we've always had like a really good referral network
Yeah.
of people who've just had really good results. We've had 13 people, at least 13 clients who've had over 1,000% growth, right? And that's like a really cool metric. I've worked with Dalai Lama, I've worked with Tony Robbins, Peter Diamandis, some of the biggest in the information product space.
Yeah.
And so it's always been easy for us to acquire clients. And now we're getting better at acquiring the right clients, the ones that we want to transform the world with, and that we get to use our expertise to do things I love the pathway that we've been going on for transforming the world, for sure.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you're a light in the world, so keep it up, and I'm rooting for you.
So are you, my man. I really appreciate these conversations. Again, one of my favorite podcasts of all time was the last one that we did. I really, really loved the timeline it took.
Yeah, me too. Awesome. Well, listener, I hope you take some action here and put some of this wisdom into your own life and your business and your marketing. And again, James, thank you for bearing your soul and sharing your insights and your experiences and your wisdom. And we'll catch you on the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer. Until then.